morning, everyone. This is Mr. Garcia. I am a teacher at Garfield High School. I am here with Rosalio Munoz. Thank you so much for allowing me a few minutes to speak to you. And you have a few questions for him, okay? So we have a lot to learn from people like Rosalio. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you, Juan, for having me and thinking it's worthwhile to ask these questions. Let's see how we do.
Thank you. Rosalio, many of our students were born and raised, or they go to school in East Los Angeles. What do you think makes East Los Angeles a special community, a special part of the city?
Well, it was a place where some of the hardest working people in Los Angeles were kind of pushed into after 1900. And more and more they started building. There were big bricklaying places, and there were people that were segregated away from where the center of LA was, or where more wealthy, better off people. But it also had very large numbers of different ethnic groups. There were white ethnics that lived in a little bit better housing, but not all of them. And in the Depression, of course, almost everybody was real poor. But there were Japanese, there were Jewish, there were Russian, there were Armenians, and there were Mexicans. And more, there were more and more Mexicans. And but it took a while. When I was 1 year old, we moved from Arizona. I was born in Flagstaff. My parents were from Phoenix and Tucson. Had a lot of family, still do have a lot of family there, but also some have left and gone to big cities like New York and LA, Mexico City, and other places. But we lived in East LA over by 5th and Rowan and on 5th Street. And after we were there about a year, we find a better place to live in the Maravilla projects, not the more modern ones you have, but these were like Army barracks kind of stuff put on during World War II. And I was born right after World War II. I was a boomer, that they called it. And but in the projects, because that's when I remember my first year, I don't really remember all that much. I'm 1 to 2, but when I was 2, I guess I could tell there was music, Okie music, let's say, Western, Tex-Western kind of stuff. Hank Williams was very popular. And then there were mariachis and rancheros in other houses and other kind of music in other of the apartments that there were in the Maravilla project. So it was a mixed group. Some of them were from Scandinavia. The people across the street the Jensens became great friends of my mother, and their daughters used to babysit me. So it was very mixed. And then after that, after we left and moved to Lincoln Heights, which was closer to town, closer to a job, my dad got a promotion out in the valley. He worked for the schools, so he wanted to be closer, but he also wanted to be in a neighborhood that was a little more mixed in Lincoln Heights. And so, in those years, more and more people started coming, more from Mexico, and they started moving people out of around downtown where a lot of Mexicans lived. That was really near Alvera Street. Mm-hmm. And what happened in East LA especially, there were more and more big factories, especially during and after World War II. They changed from making tanks to automobiles or tires and all these other things that were out there. And so it was kind of segregated. So Mexicans lived more on the east side. African Americans lived more on the south side. Whites lived more on the southeast side, outside of LA especially. And then the rich were in around the beaches or in Pasadena. That's the way it was kind of set up. And East LA was where the Mexicans were, and a lot of them worked in factories, and a lot of them were in unions. And so And then they got very active, and the unions worked to get strong. And Mexicans found that the way to get better wages and everything was being in a union and sticking together, and sticking together with other unions. And so that was a very important part also of East LA. And people started learning more and more. Well, the culture of Mexico kept coming. Downtown, you could go to the $1 Million and see all the best ranchera singers, the best movies, the best teatro, and other stuff. So that was special. Of course, there was a lot of poverty. There was a lot of dropping out of school. There was discrimination. The police were, well, they'd say it's very, very bad now, but golly, it was very bad back then. And so, whenever a cop car starts coming down the street, the kids, we would get nervous. So, anyway, those were some of the problems, and some of the problems are still here. And there were movements. There's movements now, but there's still big problems. And how do we bring those things together? So that's very, very similar. So how do we learn from what we've gone through? And that's, I think I've been able to do a lot of things in terms of helping change and bringing people together, and then learning from all the new people. Each new generation of immigrants brought new things, new struggles. And then you could see that we would change some rules, and then they changed the rules, And so we had to go back and figure out what to do and how to. But there's been progress. You can see it most. There's more of us in Washington, D.C., in Sacramento, at the City Hall, at Board of the Supervisors, School Board. There's more of us on TV. There's more of us, in the movies, making records. We started having some real good music getting on there. But we're just starting, back then. But we fought to be more recognized in all of these places, that our history, that our culture, that our humanity was realized, and that our suffering should be relieved.
Yes.
And so those were some of the things.
So, Rosalio, we're doing in large part this video because a lot of our history is not in the history books. Mm-hmm. And East Los Angeles has a very rich history, and all of our ancestors play a role in it. So what we are trying to do, ladies and gentlemen, is to bring that history to life and encourage our young people to learn from our very rich past, from our mistakes, learn from our victories, learn from the challenges, and learn from the glory days, okay? So what we want to know, Rosalio, when students go to college, they go to community college and they take a Chicano studies class, and they hear the name Rosalio Munoz, okay? Because maybe some of you don't know who is Rosalio Munoz, okay? Some of you do, and I'm very proud of that. But there's some of you who probably don't know. So when people hear your name, Rosalio, how do you want people to recognize your name? Who are you?
Well, I'm very well known in history amongst especially my generation and students of Chicano history for being the co-chair and then the chair of the Chicano Moratorium that took place August 29th. And 30,000 of us, Raza, but there were also African Americans and whites. There were a lot of Puerto Ricans there working with us. We used the name Chicano, but there were Guatemaltecos, there were Colombianos, there were, muchos Puerto Ricanos. And, but the biggest was, from around East LA, but people from Texas, from Omaha, from every state, wherever there was a barrio, just about sent people there. Anyway, it was our biggest political meeting and the biggest demonstration against the war in Vietnam by people of color. And I had been part of that, and I was the only speaker that really got to speak. Because after I gave the welcoming speech, the police poured in and declared it illegal, and started hitting people on the head with batons, tear gas. The people pushed back, and uh, that. But in the end, they really tore it up. There was a little bit of what they called rioting. It wasn't that, well, we didn't really want it to happen. I think it was federal agents that were setting the way for people to do it. But anyway, we stood up from there. We kept on demonstrating. We kept on blaming the police for what they did. We kept on getting discriminated against by the media. So that's one of the reasons that they didn't want the people to be known. But that's what I'm most known for. I was the chair, and I didn't give up. I never got maybe as national prominence because I had a special opening to do it then. But I learned there that you could the people, if you have their trust, if you listen and you can see what are the issues that are heaviest on their minds or that immediate that can be done, then you should move to do it. I've spent the rest of my life doing that. And so I'm known for that. And I think I'm known, I like to think I'm known for being a person of ethical standards, of integrity, of sticking with the grassroots, being nonviolent, and hopefully being a bit articulate, at least in English. And in Spanish, well, I just try to put out what I say in English, and sometimes it works, and sometimes people sympathize because so many of our people know how difficult it is to learn to speak in a language you're not as familiar with. I'm more familiar with English, but people have listened to my Spanish, and then on the side, Rosalio, you should say this, or you should say it like this. Así nos decimos en Guadalajara, or como sabes. And so the people teach you. The people make the leaders. The people, if you can reach them, if you're open to it, and you're struggling along with their struggle, and you have some understanding, something to add, they accept you. You know, there's some people says, oh, no habla bien, su español es pésimo y todo eso, but the other people, they don't care. They don't quite listen to that. They go for what they see as honesty and integrity and a good sense of what's going on. And hopefully, I generally have had that. Not that I haven't made mistakes and took on issues that we didn't do all that well in, but there's a whole lot of them that I did.
Yes.
And that was on national, on statewide, on county, on city, school board, dealing with police issues. That's a hard one. And getting out the vote. And I ran for office twice. Not that I thought I could win back and then, but we had to start putting out our issues as honestly as we could on the ballot. And sooner or later, more and more of our people would vote and would vote for a Latino that was talking to the issues. And then other people would say, hey, if we're going to have a more progressive city, a county, or nation, and House of Representatives and Senate, we have to work together. You can't have blacks, Chicanos, whites, Jewish, Asian, that have problems and have similar interests. If they're all together, you can do it. But if you lose one out, you don't have the punch that you had. And so we had to exhibit to people in struggle how you do that. And I think I played a good role in there for 50-some years, and I haven't given up. No. We got to pass the PRO Act. We have to defeat the very right-wingers. We have to break up what they're stalling anything positive in Congress right now. I like the PRO Act because it's for the unions, which is like this muscle and skeleton of our communities. But so much other things. We need better health care. We need better education. We need systems that work for everybody, from the bottom up and all around. And that's what I believe in.
Excellent. So you have a very rich experience with activism. You've been an activist for most of your life. What inspires you? What drives you? What is your motivation to get involved in and continue to get involved in this activism?
Well, one of the things is my family, my parents, my grandparents. my brothers and sisters, my cousins. I've had 2 marriages that didn't work out totally, but 2 good marriages for the most part. We're still friends. But my mother and father were very educated, but they were from poor backgrounds, and they were both very Mexican. And during the Depression, they managed to go through college and do very well. And they got other people in their families, especially my dad, and began in education, but then on other kinds of issues to be working to have a good life, to find the best kind of job they could do that made a contribution to the community. And it was a good life. And I said, that life can be good. Humanity can be good. And so, and people we met more and large had faith that human beings were good. That's what it was said in the Bible. God made man, and he meant men and women, or she meant men and women, and it was good. So we're good, and we can be better. And that's what they believed in. That was their faith, and that became my creed. That became my values. And when you come down to your own soul and your own self, that's what I feel good about this. And when I can do that kind of thing, and so I found out in school, my family was educated and whatever. All of a sudden I began getting segregated because my IQ was so high. They had to put me in such class, and my dad worked for the schools that I was included, but I was segregated from a lot of the Mexicanos after I became a teenager, and it wasn't always fair for me in that kind of situation. But when finally, in the 60s, on the college, all of a sudden there were movements for people. I got a little involved in interest, and pretty soon there were more Mexicans coming on the educational opportunities programs, and there were enough Mexicans to have a group so we could have meetings of 20, 30, 40 people. We called it the United Mexican American Students, who started talking, this is what's happening in our neighborhoods, and we need better education, we need all these other things. And then I found out at one of the conferences that we were dying in the war in Vietnam, and there were twice as many and worse. And I said, my God, because I was going to school, UCLA started right when the war started. And little by little it got bigger and bigger. And then, I decided I don't want to go. And then I said, I think other people shouldn't be going. And I learned, both in UMass and in the campus, I got involved in student government, learned more there. And so I stood up and went against the war in Vietnam. But like a lot of other friends, I had some went to jail because they didn't go to the war. And but I thought, well, the more pacifist way, well, in the radio we have to talk more about struggle. And so I decided, well, I'm going to refuse induction because it's a bad war. It's an immoral war. The violence is not doing good for people. But also because the worst of it in the U.S. was happening to people of color, and maybe the biggest were the Chicanos. Mm-hmm. Puerto Ricans, the statistics were very high, very close to African Americans there. And so we had to speak out on that, because as more people started going out of the war, fewer us people of color also, that were putting more and more on the front lines. So anyway, I decided I was going to oppose the war, and I was going to oppose the draft and try to talk about that. But I didn't see myself as a leader. I'm an intellectual, a middle class, I'm not like Cesar Chavez or Corky Gonzalez or others. But I got called. I eventually got drafted after I left college. And it was for the 16th of September. That was Mexican Independence Day. And I had been elected student body president at UCLA, maybe the highest student president at a big university of a national and international status as UCLA. So that made some news. And the fact that I was Mexican and talking about those issues, and I was drafted on Mexican Independence Day, I thought, well, there's a chance to in a way be a hero, to make a blow, to make us, to say something and do something that's going to have an impact on the war, on our community, and on society in general. And I did, and not alone. Other people said, okay, we know Rosalio, he was a good guy, he did good stuff at our campuses, he's an honest man, and he talks okay, and so we'll back him up. And then I learned from them and from others. We went and talked to Cesar Chavez, and he said, we drove up there, and we all dusty car up in the valley. We saw him out in the 40 acres, and he looked at us and he said, looks like you're suffering, because our car was all dusty and there were butterflies on the windshield. He says, it looks like you're struggling. He said, it's good that you're struggling. The people will relate to your struggle. Mm-hmm. And that turned out to be true. And the people were the ones that said, Rosalio, you know, haces errores, a veces horrores hablando en español, pero puedes decir eso por eso, y tú. And they teach you how to be more relevant. They tell you stories that make their points even stronger, and they inspire you. Mm-hmm. And so that experience, we had 20-some organizations. We kept on fighting. The media didn't tell our story, and that's the history books don't tell the story. Sometimes it starts right there. Mm-hmm. But it's the same kind of forces. We got to keep people divided in order to be able to make more money off of them, both in their work and in the sales and everything else. So that's what I've stuck with, and that's what's inspired me. And like I say, it goes back to my parents and the people around us, that life can be good. I was fortunate to experience that. And I found out going out in the world that it's not all, everybody is doing good, and you got to watch out for some. But it's worth going to improve this world.
Yes. I have one more question, Rosalio. When people research the Chicano Moratorium, they will often find pictures or the name Rubén Salazar. What can you say about Rubén Salazar?
Rubén Salazar was an honest man. He was a very talented man. And people said, well, he made it where very few, actually no other Mexicans got into the media. And he didn't get there easily. He had to design what he did. But as he got the opportunity to start breaking that syndrome of not talking about the real life of Mexicans in the media, in the English media, in the national media, in major events like the war in Vietnam, or like the problem Mexico had in 1968 when all kinds of students were shot down in the streets at Tlatelolco. And he began showing it, and the inequalities of education was a big thing. And he got published. I followed his life because he was killed by the police covering the moratorium. A couple of hours before he was shot down on Whittier Boulevard at the Silver Dollar, I was watching on the street. He gave me a big abrazo. Muy fuerte. He says, congratulations, you've done it. Because he didn't think we were going to do it a year before, that it could be done. And so I've always felt he didn't have to die. He shouldn't have died. Sometimes you wonder, well, maybe if we demonstrated, do this or that, it could have been different. Well, maybe so, but we did the best we could. And they still killed him. And so it's still not recognized. But now there's more recognition of Rubén Salazar. There's more recognition of the walkouts from the schools. That back we had to have our own newspapers. Back here, our La Raza newspaper. And they're to, oops, let me turn off my phone.
He's famous.
Oh.
All those phone calls.
Yeah. Okay, but we kept going from there, and now the route that we marched from from now it's Civic Center of East LA. They're on 3rd near Mednick. We marched from that park there by the sheriff's station down to Atlantic, across Atlantic to what is now Salazar Park. It was Laguna Park back then. And they've made that a national registry. That's a historical, so the whole surrounding East LA, the whole surrounding Garfield High School where you teach, is all a national monument. And some of the buildings that we had, the Brown Berets were in, the pre-clinic, where a lot of the women were doing things, all of those are national monuments.
Yeah.
And that this church, Epiphany Church, where Cesar Chavez would come and give speeches, or when he would sleep on this floor right here, when they were starting to have their boycotts and come into town and get people out to vote, this place has now been recognized nationally because it's an old time, the architecture, and it's classic, one of the oldest churches in LA, but it's recognized because it helped move the Chicano movement. It created opportunities to do that. So we're being recognized here in LA. It needs to be more, but in New York it's not so recognized.
Yes.
In Washington, D.C., it's still not so recognized, although they can get us recognized in L.A. So we still have more breakthroughs to make.
Yes.
So,
go
one
ahead.
thing to say, one of the most important things is to vote. It's not going to change everything all at once, but the more we vote, the more people all around know that we're here and we're doing something to change it. Now we have to do a lot more than that. You can have demonstrations, you can have cultural exhibits, you can become great teachers, or as best teachers as you can be, or whatever. But you have to be determined, and that's the beginning of us having our self-determination.
Yes. Rosalio, thank you for empowering all our students and also empowering me to continue with our work in education in East Los Angeles. You guys heard from Rosalio that Garfield High School is in the center of this history in our community. That school opened in 1925. The Chicano Moratorium passed very near Garfield High School, surrounding that area, and also the East LA walkouts, 1968. We are in hollow ground in East Los Angeles. Our school is very historic, and these people from the 1960s, 1950s, 70s, people who played a role in the civil rights movement, like Rosalio Munoz, have given so much so that we can have better opportunities for the present. Okay, we owe it to them. Okay, so I want to say thank you so much. Yes, I want to say thank you for your sacrifice, your hard work, your activism, and now it's our job to not forget your legacy, not forget what you guys have done for us, and leave the world a better place that we found it.
Well, I just hope as much of the students there can dedicate their lives, some of it, maybe most of your entire life to it, or be for much of your, or for all your life, be a part of it to help it. And not necessarily all the time as leaders, but as supporters of people of conviction and principles that are out to make a change for us.
Yes.
And I think we all can do it. And your generation, with the challenge, with the climate change, we need to make so much. If it doesn't, human beings disappear, along with other species. We can make a difference. We can make a difference in war and peace, and in progress economically for everyone.
Thank you. Now, last question, and I know maybe you already touched on it a little bit, but I want to give you one more opportunity to share a little bit with our students. Pretend that we're in the auditorium, and the school auditorium is filled with 1,300 students and maybe 70 teachers, faculty and staff. And you're standing with a microphone facing all these students. What would you tell them?
Well, basically, what I was saying, you, like they say at all graduations, you're on a threshold of moving forward with the rest of your life. Of course, that happens every day. But this, if you've gotten through the school system and you're going to be going out, either you're going to go to college, you're going to go into a job situation, hopefully not into prison, but that could be if you. But if you graduated, you have a better start. And you got to be flexible, but already see where you want to do good, where you want to be taking responsibilities for something, because that's leadership. If you don't take responsibility, well, who is, you know? So whether it's with your family, whether it's to help your mother or your father or others, or if it's to get more people out to vote, or to help in a campaign, or to do many other things, you can do it. And keep flexible and find what you can do.
Thank you so much, Rosalio. Thank you for everything. We'll see you guys next time. Rosalio Munoz. Vive.